Keyserling, a lesson in political culture. On the surface, Harriet Keyserling was an unlikely candidate to run for political office in South Carolina. She was born in New York City, a Yankee by Southern standards. Added to her obvious New Yorker dialect, Keyserling was a Jewish Democrat in a predominantly Protestant conservative state. But despite being an obvious outsider, her transition to the South Carolina House was fairly fluid. Her strong network of friends and associates helped in easing her transition from one step to the next. She moved to Beaufort with her husband Herbert, a physician and South Carolina native, someone who everyone in town knew, and an integral part of ensuring Keyserling felt comfortable in her new home. She got her start in politics by helping her son with the 1972 McGovern campaign. While she has stated she was not a fan of McGovern, working on the campaign opened her eyes to the political process. From the McGovern campaign, Keyserling went on to volunteer for the League of Women Voters in Beaufort and was the guiding force behind many of their initiatives. Many of the relationships she developed through the League facilitated her run for City Council and then the South Carolina House of Representatives. It must be noted that Keyserling's time as a member of the Beaufort City Council gave her the skills needed to maneuver the South Carolina legislature and represents the core of her beliefs, that public service should be about serving the constituency, and she never lost touch with that. Unique by most political standards, she did not use the City Council as a springboard for the legislature. Her constituents were not left feeling abandoned. The legislature was an extension of City Council, and her focus was on her constituents, not her career. By establishing this trust early on, it gave her the flexibility to make decisions on behalf of voters. In order to understand Keyserling's time in the South Carolina legislature, it's important to understand the political culture of South Carolina from 1977 to 1993. Daniel Elazar provides a blueprint from which we can categorize behaviors and attitudes in politics by region. In his theory of political subcultures, South Carolina falls into the category of traditionalist state, marked by conservative mentalities with a male-dominated political system. Historically reticent to change, South Carolina is steeped in Confederate legacies. The separation of the races in living spaces, etc., allowed this political culture to develop. For Keyserling, the political culture was something she had to overcome. As previously mentioned, she was an outsider by traditionalist standards, a woman, a Yankee, and a Jew. In the end, these differences worked in her favor because she was able to relate to an underacknowledged voter demographic, women and blacks. They voted for her, and in turn she sought to work for them, but the political culture stifled her ability to accomplish all that she set out to do on behalf of these key groups. In the end, the political history forms the political culture, as is the case in South Carolina. Again, delving deeper into the obstacles facing Keyserling, there were many issues that Keyserling faced, which grew out of the aforementioned political culture. The lack of female presence often made for an awkward dynamic with relating to male peers. She often had thoughts such as, should they be their usual Southern gentlemanly selves and treat me as a lady or a fellow colleague? Another issue was the lack of racial diversity, which blacks represented a solid majority of Keyserling's constituents. You have to remember, though, that South Carolina was emerging from integration and progress was slow. Equally frustrating were the religious right, who were a strong force in the legislature that often blocked any progressive measures. Combined with the weak executive branch, this only undermined Keyserling's ambitious goals to bring about change to a state paralyzed by past ideas. As we learn from McDonough, relationships are the most important factor in the legislature. Keyserling was a master at developing these relationships and saw the value in working with the many different groups. The inside game consisted of the old guard, who often controlled leadership and the agenda. The fat and uglies were the young conservatives. The crazy caucus, the group that Keyserling belonged to, were considered bright, progressive, funny, and energetic. There were the lobbyists, and then the black caucus. while the outside consisted of grassroots groups such as women's rights groups, groups of like-minded individuals coming together for common causes such as schools, the arts, and the environment. Keyserling utilized the media on more than one occasion to garner public awareness and support for legislation. She built relationships with her constituents by writing frequent columns in the local papers. She would use this method of constituent contact to explain what she was doing as a legislator for her voters. This allowed her constituents to know her as Harriet and feel comfortable to communicate with her when she was home in the district. All of these relationships allowed Keyserling to draw upon them when she needed assistance on a certain project or piece of legislation. She also honored her duty to those relationships by returning the support asked of her by her colleagues. Without this ability to work together and nurture these relationships, the legislature would essentially implode. Keyserling learned early on that knowing how to play the game and knowing the rules of the South Carolina state legislature were crucial. She found that knowing how to kill a bill was as important as writing it into law. She cites Jean Toll, a fellow legislator, and Jean's strong working knowledge of the rules. Jean benefited the Crazy Caucus by showing them how to maneuver through the rules to obtain their desired goals. Again, relationships work hand in hand with knowing the rules. A perfect example of this is the one with the Crazy Caucus using specific members that know the rules. Specifically, without Jean Toll, different methods would have to be used in an attempt to kill bills, and knowing the rules was much more productive. Perhaps one of the most important factors to Keyserling's success was her timing in the political arena. We know from McDonough that the legislative process operates on a punctuated equilibrium. Change only comes when the status quo is challenged and something drastic happens. This is especially true in the South, where change is slow. Keyserling waited for the political and social environment to be ripe for change before introducing legislation that she had been sitting on. There were no knee-jerk reactions with Keyserling. She used the rules and timing to know when a productive and appropriate time to introduce legislation was upon her. Building on the macro theme of relationships, Keyserling became considerably good at knowing when to take part in bipartisan initiatives and when to keep with the party line. She knew you had to give a little to take a little, and that is truly the mark of a successful politician. Keyserling saw herself as an advocate for minorities and those that held little social and political power. Partly due to their strong support for her as a candidate, Keyserling advocated on behalf of women's health, arts in schools, and blacks. These photos are from the Orangeburg incident, which was a massacre of blacks when they were engaging in an attempt to integrate the bowling alley. This event struck a chord with Keyserling enough to mention it as the one blemish on Democratic Governor McNair's record. The students that were protesting the failure to integrate the bowling alley cited the 1964 Civil Rights Act, an act that was already 4 years old when the violence took the lives of many protesters. This turbulent time in South Carolina's history was cited by Keyserling in an attempt to explain the slow move towards change. She was an advocate for minority rights, whether those rights be for women, blacks, non-Christians, or other forms of social and political minorities. Keyserling recognized the uphill nature of her battle. When she had bills that pushed change a bit faster than comfortable, she used the political capital gained through her relationships in the Capitol. Keyserling became frustrated with the process, so in turn she learned the rules. She changed and modified the rules by reducing the number of votes needed to invoke cloture and increasing the number of votes needed to stop a bill. She had to coordinate timing and her allies to complete this goal. She worked within the process to learn the rules of the game so that she could change them. She felt that altering the filibuster would benefit the legislative process and therefore the people of her district and state. Legislators have to walk a fine line in balancing grassroots lobbying from constituents and lobbying from professional representatives from a business or issue cause. Politicians need the support of both when re-election comes, so neither can afford to be overly neglected. In the case of Keyserling, those that worked against her were the Christian Coalition, Public Service Commission, and business interests. Those that supported her believed in government ethics reform, environmental protection, and consumer protection. South Carolina's political culture defined the relationships that were formed and that were needed. It told Keyserling how to time her legislative priorities, as well as how to lobby for an issue, grassroots versus professional lobbying. Combining knowledge of rules and the process with the established relationships was crucial to the success of Keyserling within South Carolina. This would be the same for any elected official. She was able to recognize where she was weak within the system and used her relationships to bridge the gaps. When she did not fully understand the rules or the details of a bill, she would look to her partners within the Crazy Caucus for assistance, as they did her. She made it clear that her agenda was to protect the public interest, and with every vote and move, she stayed true to her platform. Lessons learned. Hit the pavement. Good old-fashioned door knocking, phone calling, and handshaking is the ultimate way to reach out to constituents and voters. Grassroots support can assist in issue campaigns as well as general election campaigns. So utilize family support. Again, build relationships and use them without burning them out. Letters to the editor and Keyserling's frequent columns often were ways to communicate with the public while impacting other legislators and lobbyists. So utilize community support, neighbors, co-workers, religious community, personal friends. Think lobbying on the personal level. Know your numbers. Know what number of votes you need to win. Keyserling became an expert on nuclear waste and the benefits of what the arts can do for the state as well as schools. So again, be the expert, know your topic, know your supporters, know your opposition, and know your numbers. And finally, a few questions for you. In Against the Tide, One Woman's Political Struggle, Harriet Keyserling described herself as a New York Jewish liberal representing the small southern town of Beaufort. If Keyserling would have been elected today in South Carolina, do you think the relationships and rules she had to learn would be the same? Why? What are some inside and outside strategies that Keyserling could use to maximize her effectiveness in the South Carolina legislature?